Welcome back to another episode of the Classical Architecture Workshop. In this episode, we are going to begin drawing the Ionic order. Specifically, we're going to draw a simplified version of the full Ionic order, which is called the block order. For our text, we are going to use the American Vignola, a guide to the making of classical architecture by William Ware. And the Ionic order is one of 5 of the classical orders. It's right there in the middle, highlighted with the red bar. The one thing that is unique about this, moving from the Tuscan and the Doric, what you'll notice most is the column capital itself. So it's kind of got these 2 scrolls, and those are what sets it apart from the others beyond its proportions. So as we look more closely, the Ionic order specifically has these 2 scroll things. We call those volutes, and those volutes are important in distinguishing the Ionic order. But in particular, as you're looking at those, the one thing that you'll note is the Ionic order, unlike the Doric, the column capital has these volutes, but the overall height of the column itself goes from 8 diameters from the Doric, and it becomes 9 diameters with the Ionic. So it becomes a little bit more slender, and as a result, the entablature itself is 2 1/4 diameters in height. But here on the right, I just wanted to point this out really quickly, is you've got 2 examples of Ionic columns, specifically the column capital. And with that, the one on the top, you can notice that that band that starts to, it connects the 2 volutes itself. It's when it starts to dip down like that, this is called a Greek Ionic capital, and the one on the bottom is a Roman. Note the Roman does not have that little bowing aspect of it, and so the Roman version is what we're going to draw in American, according to Vignola. This is a sneak preview to the overall drawing that we're going to compose in this tutorial with the Ionic block order. So let's go ahead and get started. Well, as we get started with drawing the Ionic block order, there's a couple of tools we're going to need, as we've done in the past. You're going to need an architectural scale, a rolling ruler, or a drafting board. You will also need a something with a 90-degree angle on it, a triangle or a builder's square. You'll also need a triangle with a 45-degree and a writing utensil. So let's get started. So with this, we're going to go ahead and create our axis. The full drawing that we're going to create is a little bit of an odd number. It is, as you may recall from our other video with drawing the Doric block order, D, which is the column width, is we are imagining that this column is going to be 12 inches in diameter, or 1 foot. And so the scale that we're going to draw this at, if we're using our architectural scale, is 3/4 of an inch equals 1 foot. This is the same scale that we used previously. So as we get started, there's a couple things that we should be aware of. First off, this overall height for the whole order is going to be just beyond or just below 8.5 inches. And so as long as I can get 8.5 on here, I should be good. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a horizontal and a vertical line. My vertical, I'm not necessarily going to mark it yet because it's a little bit of an odd dimension, and you'll see why in just a moment. And we'll get our bottom here, our base. So there we go. We've got our two lines. What we've done in the past is we've created a few graphic scales. We're going to create a couple of those as we've done so we can get the overall proportioning correctly. So I'm going to go over about 1/8 of an inch or so. I'm going to create one, and I'm going to divide this whole order into 5 parts, right? So the way that a lot of the classical orders work with Vignola is that the column height is always 4 parts to 1 part. Or another way to think about it is the column is 1, and then usually 1/4 of that column height is the entablature component. All right, so I'm going to go now over a 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to make another graphic scale. This one's going to go all the way fully to the top. Okay. So the first thing that we can do is I can start laying out my column height. With the Doric order, we knew that it was 8 diameters tall, or 8D tall. As we go to the Ionic, it increases in height, which makes it appear a little more slender. And so it is 9 diameters in height. So if I grab my 3/4 of an inch scale here, because every 3/4 of an inch is going to equate to the diameter or the thickness of my column. So I'm going to create 9 tick marks on this second graphic scale area. So 6, 7, 8, and 9. And then for the entablature, so if we took 9 and divided that by 4, we would get 2 1/4, or 2.25. And so if I go ahead and, for this entablature, I'm going to go 1, 2, and then to get my 1/4 one, I'm actually going to flip this around for my 3/4 of an inch. And I'm going to mark a 1/4 marking there. That's actually going to be the top of my entablature. So right here, we can go ahead and label this. This is 2 1/4, 1/4 D. And down here, we have 9D in height. Okay, great. So with that, I'm going to use my builder's square or my triangle to go ahead and strike a line at the very top here for the top of my entablature. Make sure we've got that correct. Okay. Okay, we've got that. Perfect. And now the bottom of the entablature, I can also go ahead and strike a line there. Perfect. So now if I viewed this as 1, this dimension is 1/4 of this. So I would have 4 equal parts. And so as I'm trying to divide that into 4, I could do the diagonal rule. I've gone ahead and measured this for you, but it is essentially every 1 inch and 11/16 I am going to place a mark here. So I've got 1 inch. That's 8/16. 9, 10, and 11. Okay, I'm going to go up, slide my ruler up. So we've got 1 inch, 8, 9, 10, and 11. Again, slide that up. And I'm going to go, make sure that's aligned, 1 inch, 8, 9, 10, and 11 sixteenths. And just check this last one. That should be right on the dot, right there. Okay, so this first graphic scale, I'm just going to call this 5 parts for the whole order. So I've got 4 down here for the column, 1 for the entablature. Perfect. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do here, now that we've got the overall column height, got our entablature height, we're going to create another graphic scale. This next graphic scale we're going to use to divide the column. So as you may recall, the column has 3 parts, a base, a shaft, and a capital. And then, so we'll be able to divide those parts, and then we're also going to start dividing this entablature into a number of parts, so we can start getting the 3 main parts of that. Okay, so let's go ahead and use our rolling ruler to get a parallel vertical line. Pull this off. So this next graphic scale for the bottom, I really only need it up to this first 3/4 of an inch, or D. The next one at the very top of the column is only going to be that 3/4 of an inch D, or 1D down from the top, and then the rest I would just take up that through the whole entablature. Pull it down another 1/8 of an inch. Create another parallel line. There. You know, and while we're at it, while we've got this out, we're going to go ahead and create a couple more graphic scales for convenience sake. So, as you recall, the entire column, I'm going to make sure this is back in focus here. The entire column height, usually we go up 1/3, and then the other 2/3 we have the entices. And the entices, just as a reminder, is where the tapering of the column takes place, or the bulging. And so I'm going to go over just a little ways. This next graphic scale, I am going to create one just at this top here first. And the reason being is we divide the column capital. The Ionic's a little different in that it's got these spiral looking things on each of the corners for the capital. We call those volutes. And those volutes, the center of them is only 1/3 D. So we're going to create 1/2 because the overall capital is just slightly greater than 1/2 D. So we'll use that as a general basis, but the main line that we're going to pull across here is 1/3 D for the top. So we'll create another little small graphic scale here. And that one's going to be to break D into thirds. And then this next one is going to be the whole column into thirds so that we can get our entices to take place. Okay, great. So that is the extent of the graphic scales, the proportioning systems that we're going to need for this drawing. So let's go ahead and start with the bottom here. If I use my 3/4 of an inch scale, there we go. Okay, so if I'm placing this on the very bottom, I've got a tick mark I will just carry this D across, that 1D, and then there's a tick mark right there in the middle, whether I'm using the one with all the teeth or the other one. And I can use that for that part. I will do the exact same thing up here on the top. Carry D across and mark the center. So we're going to label this. This is 1/2 D, or D over 2. And same with this one, D over 2. All right, so this next one, the way that we are going to split this into thirds, we are going to still use our 3/4 of an inch. We're just going to mark that end part so we can carry that line down for the D. But I'm going to flip this over and go to my 1/4 inch scale, because if we break 3/4 of an inch into thirds, that will be 1/4 of an inch. Every 1/4 of an inch we will put a tick mark. So we can call this D over 3 because we're breaking D into thirds. Great. Now for this top part, for the entablature itself. The entablature is broken into 18 parts. So we could do the diagonal rule, right, with our ruler and mark every 18 parts. But the scale that we're drawing this at, it easily comes out to 3/32 of an inch. So if we're using 3/32 of an inch here, if I place this here at the top, I will see I've got 0, 4, 8, 12, 16, 17, and 18. So I'm going to place a tick mark at each of these marks. Start at the bottom, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0 is already marked. Perfect. So those 18 divisions now will give us the sufficient information so that we can subdivide this entire entablature into its 3 respective parts. Now let's go ahead and do the entices and break that down. So remember, our column height is 9D tall. So if we're going to go up 1/3 and then 2/3, that means we're going to go up 3D tall. So I can just carry that line across, and then the rest I can go up another 1/3, 3D, to get that other mark there, to label those. So I can use my 90-degree triangle here for this first one. Line up that corner. So I have got a perpendicular line. Take that all the way across, because that is going to tell us the extent of the straight portion of the column, and then as it starts to taper up. Now I'm going to go up another 3. Okay. Just carry this one across. Make sure we're lined up with that line right there. Okay, so this bottom part, we're calling this 3D, and then this top part where the entices is taking place, we'll label that entices, E-N-T-A-S-I-S, and this is 6D in height, all of that area. or 2/3 of the full column. Great, now that we've got that, we're going to go ahead and place our center line for our column. If you're measuring this, you could make it about 4 inches off of the side here. Doesn't really matter exactly where this is going. And since this is the center line of the column, we're going to start above the entablature and we're going to do a dash dot line type, just as we've done in the past, to mark our center lines. Slide this down just a bit. Okay, perfect. And we'll label this CL for our center line there at the top. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do here is we're going to start drawing our column, how wide it is. So to do that, we are going to grab our scale. We are going to go to our 3/4 of an inch equals a foot scale. I'm going to center this 3/4 of an inch scale here on the center tick mark, and then on either side I'm going to put a little tick mark. I'm going to come up here to the top, place it on the center, 3/4 of an inch either side, and there we have it. Okay, so down here at the bottom though, we are going to create a small little graphic scale. I'm going to use my rolling ruler. It is going to be the width of D, and we're going to split that D into 6 parts, because up here at the top, the narrow part, the neck of the column capital, and right where it comes into the capital itself as it starts to flare down, that width is 5/6D. So we're going to be able to get that from there. But first off, let's go ahead and mark off, create a vertical line for either side of the column that we created. So once again, we're taking that only up to that 3rd part there. And then this we're labeling as DE. Oops. Okay. Now if I use my 3/4 of an inch scale here, if I go 4 little tick marks every 4, I can mark a tick mark, and that is going to enable me to divide this whole thing into 6 parts, so that D becomes 6 equal parts. And as I'm doing that, towards the top, I'm going to slide my ruler just a little bit, and I'm going to place one at, if I go 2 of those small little tick marks over, I'm going to place a little line there. I'm going to do the same thing over on this side, and you'll see why in just a moment. Up here at the top, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to place this right on the center line, 3/4 of an inch. Make sure we're staying in focus here. Great. So I'm going to go over 2 tick marks, place a little line there, 2 from either side. And that is going to be the width of the column as it gets to the very top there. Okay, so with that, we are going to grab our ruler, and we are going to strike a line across for the column capital. The one that we're going to do is the third D. So if I, remember we created that little graphic scale there. If I go ahead and strike a line across here, this is the main line that we're going to use for our column capital. The reason being is those spiraling volutes, the center of those, the I it's called, goes right through this 1/3 D. Obviously, if that's the center, that circle is actually going to dip down below that with the volute. But this is, once we do our actual enlarged drawing of the column capital and base, you'll see this more in depth on how that is tying in. But this 1/3 is a good point of measurement. And from this point down, that's where it starts to taper. So I'm going to use this 90 to create a perpendicular vertical line just for that length of the column capital, the 1/3. And we're going to label this as our capital. And this is 1/3 D. So a reminder. But in general, since we're doing a simplified block version, just as a reminder, the overall capital is actually slightly larger than 1/2 D. So we're going to place this just as a reminder, because that circle will actually come down. It dips slightly below that 1/2 D. So we're going to add that there for us. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and strike a line for our column base. And we've already got that at 1/2 D with our little graphic scale that we created. So we are calling this our column base. And this is 1/2 D. Perfect. Okay. So with that, now we can actually connect our edges of our column. So we're going to go up to the bottom of that capital, that 1/3, and connect it to our other line there. It's going to be slightly tapered in, get slightly smaller. We'll do this same on the other side. All right. Now, one thing that we did down here at the bottom when we broke this into 6 parts, and we could have used this earlier to kind of help us get things lined up. So this top part, remember, is 5/6 D, so we actually subdivided one of these 6 parts on the bottom in half. We added a little tick mark there. So I'm just going to create a dashed line that goes all the way through the entire column. So we can see now how that 5/6 D comes all the way here to the top. So it starts here at the bottom, goes all the way there to the top. And we'll do the same thing on this opposite side here. Okay. So once again, we are creating a dashed line that is going to be the full extent or length better yet, height of the column. Okay, there we go. So now this entablature, we need to subdivide these elements and bring some of these lines across here for convenience sake. So to do that, our first part of the column, the architrave, is actually, its measurement is 5/8 D. And so we are actually going to go up 5 of these tick marks that we created and strike a line. So if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 here, use my triangle or square. Make sure we're lined up on both sides. I'm going to strike this line across. And we've got 5 there, and so we are going to label this. This is our architrave. And this measurement is 5/8 D. All right, so the frieze then becomes this next element. We can go ahead and label this the frieze. And the frieze is actually 6/8 D. So once again, going up 5 for the architrave. Now we're going to go up 6. So 3 and 3. So right there. That's where we're going to take that across. Make sure we are doing good. That is our frieze. And then the rest, the cornice, is 7/8 D. So if we were to count here, we've got 3, 6, and then 7. So that 18 parts that we originally used to subdivide the full entablature, that's how we get that. Now let's go ahead. We're going to, one thing that we can recall from the Doric order and all of the classical orders is this edge of the column always lines up with the face of the entablature above it. And so if we go ahead here, using my triangle with a 90 on it, strike a straight line. I'm going to strike that straight line for the face of the architrave, the frieze. The cornice is going to come out at a 45, but I'm going to go ahead and dash in a line through that cornice area, and then above the entablature create another vertical line. So it'll look something like this. And then using my 45-degree triangle here, I'm going to place this at the edge of the entablature. I'm going to strike a 45 degree for my cornice projection. And that distance there for that projection is going to be the exact same in length as it is in height. So that distance is 7/8 D for the projection there. And we can go ahead and just put a little angle here to remind ourselves that this is a 45-degree angle. Great. So One last thing that we're going to go ahead and put on here before we quit. We're going to put a dimension stringer. Going from top to bottom. Make sure I'm straight there. Oh. The top part did not come out. Okay. So I'm going to place a tick mark for this full entablature. I'll also place a tick mark down here at the bottom. I can erase a couple of these lines, like the base that intersects it, or the capital, and some of these other cornice and frieze lines. And if I go ahead and label this now, so we have just drawn the Ionic column. That's simplified version. And its overall height is 9D. And our entablature is 2 1/4 D, or 2.25 D. Okay, so let me just double check here. I think we got everything. Oh, one thing here at the top. We'll just add a little dimension stringer here across, just as a reminder for the tapering. And this is 5/6, 5/6D up here at the top. So that's it. If I was to go back and clean this up a little bit, right, I'd probably color in some of my graphic scales, do a little outline on the column capital itself so it stands out a little bit more. But there we have it. That is our Ionic block order, simplified version. In the next few videos, we're going to get into actually drawing out the molding details for the entire column. So the base moldings, the capital with its volutes, and then beyond that, we'll get into the actual entablature, more of its details. So thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time.